The most time efficient thing you can do is to focus on your stage 1 all the way to your stage 2-1. The few decisions you do make here have the highest potential impact on your game. If the variance is high enough, your game can be decided on 2-1. I think the worst feeling in this game is having to sit there for 30 minutes after you realize that this game is already in 8th. But you sit there because there's a chance you might save 10 LP and go 7th. This happens because TFT is a game that builds upon your last decisions, and not many players realize how impactful that actually is. Of all the questions I see, 90% of them fall under 2 categories. The first one is what we call extreme variance. So this is when players encounter something rare in their game that derails their placement. So let's say they're playing towards Twitch and they've committed, and after 100 gold, they see nothing. Even though they're not contested, they scouted, they built all the right items, they played a strong board. If you don't hit, you don't hit. It's rare, but because it is a luck-based game, it can happen. Or something more common is if you're playing towards AP, you get only swords and like gloves. To an extent, you can play around that, build Shojin, Giant Slayer, Gunblade, and then gloves become TG. But there's only so much you can do against extreme variance, and even the best players have a hard time dealing with the most extreme cases. That's why you'll see in tournaments and higher elo ladder games that players prefer low variance portals back when there was portal voting, and they just don't like playing around Wandering Trainer or anything that leaves their agency out of it. My best advice is to understand that this is going to happen, and it's only about 10% of your games at most. I would not waste time worrying about how to prevent every worst case scenario, and just focus on how to play around the 90% of your other games. If you try to improve at your 10% of these games and try to figure out every possible scenario, then it's not nearly as efficient as just focusing on your average games. Sorry, I don't know why I wrote extreme players. It should be extreme variance. So if you guys ever heard that term, man proposes, God disposes, that's basically what it is. You do what you can, but at the end of the day, if Mortdog says you can't top 4, then you can't top 4. Within reason, of course. I think it can be a pitfall to think about every game as being an extreme variance game. If you think about it statistically, and I'm not the best player to talk math about, but let's say you go into every game with a equal skill lobby. If the lobby is equally skilled, luck becomes the determining factor on who bot 4s and top 4s. So let's draw it out. So you have a 50% chance, let's say 1 in 2, of top 4ing, and a 50% chance of bot 4ing, right? Because it's all going to be luck. If you bot 4 the first time, that's a 1 in 2 chance of happening. If you bot 4 again the next game, that's going to be a 1 in 4 chance, right? So already it's a 25% chance that 2 games in a row were due to extreme variance, or variance that you had no agency over, right? And a third game would be 1 in 8 chance. That's that's already a very low chance, right? And we're just talking about bot 4ing. I've personally seen in my career players who go like 8th place 3 times in a row, and they blame luck all the way. That's not impossible, but if we do the math on just the 1 in 8 chance, getting 2 8th place games is going to be a 1 in 64, right? And then getting a third one is like 1 in 5. Is my elementary school math good? Is that 512? Right? So that's like 0.0019. Is that correct? Yeah, that's a 0.0019% chance. So yeah, if we're talking about extreme, this is some extreme variance, and I don't think that this is the best way to put it mathematically, I don't have a great understanding of probability, but this is just the way I think about it. When I go bot 4 3 times in a row, I understand that the chances of it not being my fault is nigh impossible. So maybe one of them was, but there's clearly something I'm doing wrong. So don't worry about question number 1 here. Let's go back to here and just probably erase some of these. And similarly, the second major type of question I get is probably the bigger one, and it's going to be bad situations. Kind of similar to the first one, but this one's on you. You're in a bad situation and you want to ask, what should I do in this spot? This isn't an extreme variance case. This is you. You put yourself in this spot and you want to figure out what you should have done in that spot to get out. And the easy answer right now is don't worry about figuring out what to do in all these spots. Just don't end up in those spots in the first place. The skill in TFT is not measured by how good you are at escaping these situations. It's based off how good you are at avoiding them. If you put a rank 1 global in the worst spot in TFT, they're not going to get out and they're going to go 8th just like you. They're not rank 1 because they know how to get out. They're rank 1 because they never get in that spot in the first place. A great example of this is taking the wrong augment. For instance, if you're taking invested on 3-2, that's often not the correct choice, and it's pretty bad to take an econ on 3-2 in general. So instead of trying to figure out what I should have done with the money, how could I play around the augment better, just understand what augment you should have taken in the first place, and you don't have to worry about all these scenarios where you take a bad augment and you want to play around it. If you make a habit of trying to figure out how to dig yourself out of every hole, you're just going to end up in a hole every game. That's all you learn how to do. I think your time is much better invested in learning what the best augment there was, and then if you played that incorrectly, trying to figure out how you should play that better. I can guarantee you that the two questions we talked about are the biggest waste of time when you're trying to learn TFT. Players spend way too much energy and time on these niche scenarios and holes that they made themselves. They don't focus on the bigger picture of actually getting better and learning how to climb. And this all starts with the early game. So the reason we talk about those 1 and 2 questions is because our early game is the best way to prevent that question 2, ending up in these bad spots altogether. And I can represent this using a diagram that I created. So to kind of understand what we're looking at, this is showing our trajectory. This will be essentially what we're expected to place at any point during the game. So if this is the start of the game right here, we can draw like an arrow. Let's go blue here, and this will be time. So as time progresses, this will be like, I don't know, stage 7. This will be 1-1, the very start of the game. And then somewhere here will be like 2-1, right? We enter a game, it should be a flat line because, there's nothing that affects our game yet. There's nothing to look at, so it should be like a 4.5, dead average. If we make a mistake on 2-1, that very small mistake, we can represent that using a red arrow. Let's use this, and we'll just show like this will lower placement by this much, right? Very small arrow. And our line will reflect that. So it's going to go down like this. It's a very small mistake right here, but it severely impacts our placement. So now suddenly we're projected at like a 7th or 6th place. And then later down the line, let's say it's like, let's go back to blue. It is 4-2, right? And we make an exact same impact, like this red arrow, going up this time. Even though it's the exact same amount of impact, the actual result it has on our game, our trajectory, is a lot weaker than it was on 2-1, right? It's the exact same size, but suddenly on 4-2, it does very little to increase our 6th place into like a 5th place. This is why sometimes you'll hear streamers say, this place is a 5th, or isn't this place an 8th? It's because they understand trajectory and they kind of know where the game is leading. If we're talking about a game that starts in a bad spot, right? Like it's already projected 8th, there's only 3 things that can happen realistically, right? 1, you high roll, right? H2, you mid roll, and 3, you low roll. If you high roll, right, you're going to go up. If you mid roll, you're going to stay the same. And if you low roll, you can't go lower than 8th, but it's going to be in a worse spot, right? So suddenly 2 out of 3 options, you're going to be going 8th, and only one way can you go higher than the spot you're projected currently. What that means is in that spot, it's pretty unlikely your favor is going to change unless something pretty impactful happens. A little bit of bad luck early is something that's a lot worse than a little bit of good luck later. You'll see it's annoying to see sometimes when streamers complain about every small thing, but If it's early on, then like they have every right to complain because it just impacts their game way too much. Similarly, if they're like going, first, then the opposite happens, right? Only if they low roll, right, can their spot change. Because 2 out of 3 times they're either going to go first or stay or project somewhere near that placement. So it's really important to have a initial trajectory that's going in a good spot. Because later down the line, it takes a lot more for you to change your trajectory. So let's start talking about what's important on stage 1 and stage 2. The first thing you always want to talk about is your holds. I think holds are super underrated on 2-1, and this just sets up everything you need for the remainder of your game. So going back to here real quickly, I want to stress the importance of this is you need like 3 copies of one unit to get a 2-star, right? Let's pretend that's like rolling 3 dice and hitting all the same number. Let's say 1, right? If this happens, you get a 2-star unit, which is obviously a huge thing if you want to win streak the early game. The odds of you getting the same number 3 times is going to be 1 in 6, and for one of them, and then for all 3 of them, it's going to be 6 times 6, 36, and then like 216 is so that's obviously a very rare number. It's not going to happen, right? But what if you said you can freeze one of the dice and keep it at 1? So now this is locked, and you only need to roll 2 dice to get your 2-star unit. That's going to be 1 in 36. Much better odds. And that's basically what holding pairs or units on your bench does for you. If we hold a pair, let's say we hold a Maddie pair, which is a great hold, our odds of hitting a 2-star Maddie is now 1 in 6 instead of 1 in 36 or 1 in 216 if we didn't hold any. And that's why we want to hold pairs in the early game as well as your late game or mid game throughout the entire game, but depending on their value, of course. We can talk about that later. And these are going to be a tier list of holds, 1 cost, 2 cost, and 3 costs that you should hold on stage 1 and stage 2. These will be rated based on 2 things: how strong the actual unit is, whether it's 1-star or 2-star, and what boards it leads into. So, for instance, Lux and Maddie are the premier AP and AD item holders. Both of them can easily get you to 4-2 without having to switch off. Lux 2 is an amazing unit. Throw an Archangels or Shojin on her. Maddie just needs like a Rage Blade Shojin, i.e. very flexible itemization. So for me, these are always must holds, and that's why they're in S tier. In A tier, we have units that are more forgiving, I'd say. For instance, if I have a Maddie 2 or a Lux 2, it doesn't really matter what frontline I have. Like, obviously, if I have Lux 2, I prefer having a Vladimir because she's a Sork and I can, it's more efficient that way. But Lux 2 plus like Steb 2 and Trundle 2 is more than fine as well, right? It's actually a really strong board. So frontline is just going to be not as important as S tier not because it's not as important, because frontline is very important, but because the units themselves are more abundant. You have like 4 different really strong frontline options versus like only 1 with luck. Bruisers are the strongest frontline early game. Anything with a lot of HP is always going to be the best sort of frontline early. And then Sentinels are just like really strong, and they go into a lot of strong boards later on, like Heimerdinger. Aurelia, I'm pretty sure Aurelia is like the strongest frontline in the game right now, for at least for 1 cost. She's really strong, and she has really good traits in Sentinels and Rebels if you have like Ezreal or something. Zyra is a very strong, she's basically S tier, but I think Lux sort of gets the edge over Zyra because she has more util, and I think she's like got better lines, like going into Academy and playing around like Sorks. Zyra is very good too, but if I had a choice between holding 2 Luxes and 2 Zyras, I'd probably hold the Luxes instead. Moving on to B tier units, these guys are actually strong, and they have the potential to be boards at 5 streak, even against like these guys, even against the S tier units, but they need more setup. It's a lot more rare. So for instance, if I have a 2-star Vex with items and a 2-star Aurelia, let's say just like good frontline and good backline, and I have items for Vex, then that's going to be a board that pretty much has strong potential to 5. In the same vein, Lux by herself as like a 1 cost, as a 1-star and like a random frontline can be almost as good as like a Vex. Like the odds of hitting this setup requires a lot more than something that this setup can do with half as much luck. And that goes for like Violet as well. Like Violet's a good 2-star unit, She has a great. She's one of the few melee item holders that can play into stuff like ambushers or I guess like Violet or Vi. Sorry, you don't really want to play towards Embessa, but she needs more setup, right? Like you kind of want to hit like Violet and then a 2-star Draven, maybe get the family opener. So it's much easier to just like hold something like Steb pair or Trundle pair, a lot more viable. Finally, we have C tier where these units are just either not good or are only good under very specific conditions. So Draven is good. Like he was good last patch. He's a lot worse now, but he's only good if you have like 2-star Draven and a 2-star frontline, Pit Fighter, and like a Tristana. And he also needs a Rage Blade, like one attack speed item. So that's a lot of requirements, and I'm not going to hold a Draven 1 over like an Aurelia 1 because I'm going to hold out on the promise like that I'm going to get all those setup requirements. Like this Aurelia 1 is just going to be a higher value hold. Same thing with the Mumu. Wardens are the worst frontline right now, and a Mumu 2 is only good if either I have like a Nocturne or I have like a Darius 2 or I have like a Vladimir, which I can play into like 2 Sork and 2 Warden frontline. He's definitely like a Mumu 2 is definitely really good. He just doesn't really play into anything else. He's only there if you have a strong board already. Similarly, Morgana I think is like Vex but weaker. She needs a man item first of all, and if you don't have like an opener like this, I think the main opener is going to be 2 Visionary with like Sentinels. She's not going to be that strong. She really, unlike Vex that can actually one shot like clumped units, she really needs her frontline so she can like kill everything. A lot of times she just leaves everyone at 1 HP, and even after her buff, I don't think she's performing that well. And these are, by the way, some of the boards that we'll look at right now. These are like the 1-cost boards. There's only like 4 main ones I would look at. So this is like the 80 one. It's Maddie plus whatever frontline. Obviously, like if I have Aurelia 2 and Singe 2, I'm going to play Maddie plus those guys. Obviously, with Steb, it's more likely to play. It's better to play because it's Enforcer optimizes the comp. But this is essentially what it boils down to, right? Like you throw like an IE and Last Whisper on her, and then you play into like Corki or whatever 80 comp you try. Next one is going to be Sork Opener. So this kind of requires you to hit your 4-cost or 3-cost Sork unit. You can either choose Nami or Swain. I think Swain's a lot better, but this is like your default AP opener. Again, without Swain, it's going to just be like, 2 Sork plus frontline. You can have 2 Sentinels instead. But obviously you want like the 4 Sork, and that's gonna lead into like Sork, obviously, sometimes Silco, Heimer, I guess if you have really good items and you have a lot of money. I think AP Academy isn't very good unless it's like a really high econ portal, or you have like an econ augment to hit like a Heimer 2, and probably the 4 Sork 4 Emissary board as well, or sorry, definitely that's probably the first option. And then this is the Visionary board we talked about, the other AP opener, not as good as this one, just worse units and more setup. This probably just leads into Heimer as well, or like, I don't like playing Rebels without a +1, so probably not Rebels. Just 4 Sork, 4 Emissary again, probably. Finally, actually Renata is a good spot. If you have like the right items, Renata works as well. Pretty good comp right now. And finally, we have like the family opener. Again, this is a pretty strong board actually, but too much setup, right? Other boards you can get away with like having anything, like I mentioned, like this can be 2 Sentinels, and it's only going to be slightly weaker than having 2 Bruisers. But this one like needs very specific units for it to work, right? You need the 3 family members, you need the 2 Conqueror, and you need the 2 Pit Fighters. Like you need these very specific units. So it's a lot more unrealistic for you to hit. And on top of that, you want them 2-starred, and you want a Draven 2. Not that common, you'll see, but it does like play into the family reroll line. Like if you high roll a lot of these units, it does give you like a direction, which is always something I value early on. Again, like openers aren't that important or aren't that complex really. Like those are the 4 openers you really need to just like learn, and anything else is a variation built on that, or they require a 3 cost, which we'll talk about in a sec. But let's go into 2-cost holds. So 2 costs are probably the best units to reroll at the moment, and that's why we want to include potential reroll lines on top of the first 2 points we talked about. The first 2 points being how strong is the unit by itself or in general, and what boards they lead into. And this is going to be on the Discord as well, if you're part of it, but this is going to be like what comps you can play with what openers. So if you're one cost like or two costs, early game is playing around these items, and this is what you can play towards too. And they're ordered from like the best comps to the worst comps. I did not include any comps that were not in the meta here. Like these are the comps I think you should play around right now, and I think every other comp needs very, very specific conditions or are just not worth playing. For the most part, slams and like rerolls don't really go together because if you're slamming items, you don't really want to be playing rerolls because they're very reroll comps have very specific itemizations, and they you can't really play with like whatever unless you like move the items off after. So S tier are obviously going to be Trist and Urgot. I think Urgot, it goes without speaking, is one of the best comps in the game right now. If you have an early Urgot, I'm never going to sell it unless I get dropped like tier, rod, belt, or tier. Those have very like tier has like no value in Urgot whatsoever unless you're making Hodge, which Urgot really wants BT. And you can't make redemption because it's not great early, and the first belt's going to be Sterix always. Trist is good because obviously one of the best AD item holders, and she also stacks AD every time she kills a unit. So finding one on stage 1 and putting it on your board helps her get like 1 or 2 AD head start. And also leads into other lines like Trist reroll and like Sentinel Trist reroll and Watcher Trist reroll, which are some of the best comps right now. Sentinel's not that good unless you know what you're doing, but the Watcher one is definitely really. A tier we have Renata. I think Renata might actually be S tier now that I'm thinking about it because she's a really good, probably the best AP item holder in 2 cost, and she leads into the Renata reroll line, which as you can see is like very strong at the moment. I think it should be like somewhere in A tier. Somewhere like she probably has right here A tier, on the very cusp of it. But she really does require specific items like Shojin and moving on Rel. Rel is a great unit because she's 3 traded, and every one of those traits are really strong early. So Conquer helps you get free stacks for econ. Visionary gives you opens up the other lines with visionary units like the Vex one and obviously the Renata one. And just having a visionary unit that's frontline is very appealing for that comp or that board. Vlad again leads into Black Rose and Sork frontline for Sork, one of the few ones you can hit. Zeri, probably the best, not the best, but probably better than Triss if you have the right items as an AD item holder, and also can play towards Zeri reroll. Either you're playing Zeri Sentinels, which does require like a Singe 3, or the other more popular version, which is Zeri Watcher. I could see Zeri being moved down to B tier. I don't think. I think she's a very strong unit, but I think you need a bit too much for her to get online. I think because you need like specific items for her, like a Rage Blade or attack speed item and a IE for it to really work. But moving on to the B tier, Camille is good because it lets you play into the Ambusher line, or Enforcers, but I don't think she's a very strong unit, and the board early game isn't as strong, right? So like the only board there really is for her is going to be like this board, which most people know is that, and then you play a Trundle and a Powder right here. So it's just going to be Camille, Trundle, Scrap like that, and then or something like that. It's a nice board, but it does fall off like past 3-5. And if you're building items like this and stuff, you're not going to like bruiser items. You're going to only play towards Vi, or if you have like Hodge and like Titans and you haven't built like Edge of Night or like Deathblade, then you can play towards Echo. Camille is also not a great reroll unless you have a artifact for her like Prowler's Claw or any of the good ones like Silvermere Dawn and the one that Spectral Cutlass, the one that jumps to the backline. Yeah. Moving on to C tier, Leona, just not a good unit unless you have Academy. I think she's one of the worst 2-cost tanks, 2-starred. I think 3-star Leona is actually insane, but I think she's probably the worst frontline for Sentinel without her traits activated. So unless you have Ezreal, which is a 3-cost, unless you high roll that, she does not have much value. I would rather just play Aurelia 2 or hold a Aurelia pair because it's a higher chance of hitting Aurelia 2 than just finding one Leona and looking for 2 more Leonas. Ziggs, similarly, Scrap, you don't want to win streak with it, so not very good anyways. And for him to be good, you need very specific items like 2 mana items. And Dominators is not something you can get without a 3 cost. Either Blitz or Cassiopeia, in general, not a very good hold. Even worse, though, are your D tier holds. Like Akali, I say this very rarely, but I'm pretty sure I insta-sell her every time. Vander is a Watcher, which you don't really want to play around either way, and there's already abundance of 1-cost Watchers. So if you really need something to pair with your Vladimir, you're not gonna like hold this Vander because you're gonna find another Watcher, and it doesn't really matter what it is. Set, again, he's a bruiser. You have an abundance of early game bruisers. And finally, we have your 3-cost holds, which I think are the most important ones to know outside of 1 costs, because the gold that comes in on stage 2 comes in usually 6 gold and 3 components. Sometimes they can give you units instead of your 6 gold. So having a 3-cost drop instead of 3 gold can prevent you from holding units in your shop that you want to buy. So you don't want to be holding something like a Blitz and Scar because you don't know the real value of it, and it prevents you from holding like a Lux or Aurelia. These are rated in a way a bit differently because 3 costs are the key to a lot of really strong boards on stage 2. Already off the bat, the Ezreal opener with like unlocks Academy. So without a 3-cost drop, it's going to be locked behind this Ezreal if you want to play an Academy opener, which is one of the strongest openers in the game. Same thing with Swain, the 4 Sork opener, or playing around 4 Conk. Both really strong openers is locked behind Swain. Also, Swain is like one of the best, probably the best AP item holder early game, and the best frontline as well. That guy's insane. Smeech is a Chem Baron. On top of that, he's a really strong, the best melee item holder. So he's like a no-brainer. Plays into Smeech reroll, which is a A-tier line, and S-tier with the right conditions. And then GP is like, I guess he unlocks 4 scrap, but his real value is like being a really strong AD item holder backline. And also, if you find the Swain, you can play Form Swapper. He's also like really good if you're playing around like Conquerors because he gives you Pit Fighter and Scrap, which that board, like if you see the Pit Fighter board that we talked about before, it's really hard to find upgrades for that board because like the traits don't lead anywhere. So finding a GP that gives you Scrap as well, like lets you throw in a Trundle or a different scrap unit to find a slightly stronger board. In general, just getting a free item off scrap is really good too early game. A tier Rennie, in terms of like versatility, I think Rennie doesn't really lead anywhere, but I can't really put Rennie lower than A tier because she's the best bruiser by far, and she's Chem Baron obviously. A 3-cost Chem Baron, it lets you find your 1-cost and 2-cost very easily, or it helps you find 3 Chem Baron easier because the 1 and 2 costs are much easier to find on low levels. Also really, really good at killing units early because her spell is like targeted at a single unit. Next, we have B tier. TF, just a generally strong AP item holder. He doesn't need very specific items. Like I kind of want raw AP or like a Shojin. Shiv is fine. And I think he's kind of awkward from my experience. He's probably the TF and Nunu are the units I have the least experience playing around with early game, so I can't say too much, but in general, I think TF without like a 2-star Steb or a Loris doesn't do nearly as well as any of these 3 costs, or even one of these 2-star 1 costs. Loris, Sentinels are an abundance, but he does have a high value. I put him near like A, B tier because you can play around Maddie with him. So if I have like Maddie 2, I'm always going to hold this Loris. Kog'Maw unlocks a really strong board. So the 4 1-cost boards I showed you before, anything that unlocks a board better than that is going to be rated pretty highly on this 3-cost tier list. And Kog'Maw is one of those units where you can just throw pretty much any attack speed or AP item on him and any frontline, and he'll probably streak you to stage 3-5, or if you're lucky, 4-1. He is not like an A or S tier unit because I think without an artifact you can't play into Kog'Maw, and outside of Kog'Maw, like your AP options aren't very strong, right? Like Renard is a reroll, so you can't win streak into that because you're leveling. And Sork is kind of annoying to pivot into if you don't have like a Sork opener. So you're really left with Silco, which is I think is like very unreliable unless you hit everything and you have a lot of gold. Next in C tier, we have Nunu. I almost always sell this unit unless I have like Urgot items, but I just don't think he's a like unit that's rare enough. What he does, you can find pretty much in like a Steb 2 or a Trundle 2. He's just any other bruiser. He does have a lot of value in being a visionary, so I would honestly put him in B tier now that I think about it. But again, haven't played around too much. I'm not even sure how good the early experiment trait is. Like early, I've had study group members tell me he's good, but I can't really put him in A tier without seeing it myself. Okay, so this might be a bit controversial, but I think Cassiopeia is not anything higher than B tier because one, you might think she's strong because she unlocks the Black Rose opener, which again is good, but she's not a great unit. I think like a Ziggs 2 versus Cassiopeia 2, I'm pretty sure Ziggs 2 is stronger. Uh, because her Black Rose trait is so strong, Cassiopeia has to be nerfed in response. And I think without very specific items, I don't think Cassiopeia lives up to something like a Kog'Maw or even a TF. And even if you think about this like Black Rose line, which is locked behind, like you can't have an early Black Rose line without a Cassiopeia, right? Because she's a 3 cost, and you can only have like Morgan Vlad. This board isn't that strong if it's like unupgraded, right? So like Vlad 2 is your front line. So you kind of need a 2 cost to be upgraded, kind of rare, and you're playing around Watcher. So it's usually going to be something like a Mumu 2, and that's going to be your strongest board. That means your item holder has to be Cassiopeia. But already, this comp doesn't have Dominators. And if you want to find a Dominator, it's either Ziggs or Blitz. Ziggs is another backline, which you don't really want here. And your best option is Blitz, but he's a 3 cost, right? So you need to get even more lucky. And this is probably going to be your best case scenario. I do think this needs some level of like high rolling, and I do think this is strong, but it does need that luck to hit. And I'm not really comfortable holding this Cassiopeia in the hopes that I hit this entire line. Again, AP as well, so I don't really trust what it plays into, but I guess it's a pretty easy like play into like Sorks. Overall, though, I would rather just like hold like 2 Luxes over a Cassiopeia, I think. So those are all the 3 costs, and I'm gonna quickly go over like what they play into and go over some of the 3 cost boards. So a mistake that I see a lot of people have when in their thinking is I like sometimes post a board or I'll see players like show a new like level 8 comp, and then all the comments are like, okay, what's the early game board for this? Which is a really strange way of thinking about the game and incorrect from my perspective. It's fine to ask those questions because when you first start on TFT, that's how I would recommend playing, just connecting from point A to point B. But in reality, if you want to climb higher, you have to stop thinking like that. If you're thinking about early game boards for like an academy comp, then you're putting the cart in front of the horse, right? The way you should be thinking about your openers is openers come first, right? You should be building the strongest board you can and then figuring out what to play from then on. So let's say I make a really strong board with built around like a Shojin item holder, then these are the comps I'm playing into, right? I'll zoom in a bit. So like Sork, I think the best one is 4 to 6 Sork here. So 4 Emissary always with Sork, unless you have a +1, then you can play 6. If you don't have a +1 Sork, 6 Sork will never be your strongest board. And then there's Academy. There's a huge gap between Sork and Academy. The reason Academy isn't that strong is because when you do your 4-2 roll down, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to hit a Heimer 2 on your 4-2 roll down. That means that you're probably going to be stuck on a Heimer 1, which is going to be very weak. And if you don't make it to level 9, this Academy comp is very mid. So what you want to do is play around in an 80 Academy and play around Ezreal 2, which is pretty much guaranteed to hit on your level 8 roll down or even your level 7 roll down. And then just go level 9 from there and try to find the Jace. So AP Academy isn't very good unless you have a guaranteed Heimer 2, and then you can go 9 from that spot. Scrap is whatever. Like you just put that Shojin on Ziggs or GP. Ziggs gets dropped later. It's just something that to note that you can play towards Scrap if you have the Shojin. Enforcers, TF is like an underrated item holder in that one. And then like Silico and then Renata. Renata is very strong, but again, if you're like slamming items and you're thinking about what I should play, you're probably past like level 6 by then, and you don't really want to think about playing win streak into a reroll comp. To end off this video, I'm going to go over one of my own VODs and kind of put into practice what I was talking about your 1 cost holds. So really quickly, we're going to apply what we learned using this VOD that I played a couple days ago. just a random bot I had in my hard drive. It is a steb opener with no encounter as the portal, and we always want to check Academy as soon as possible. Little tip: you can put like a Lux in your team builder to find what Academy it is. Archangels and Declaw makes me not want to play towards Academy because Declaw is not a great item and Archangels isn't an Ezreal item. So we want to play around 80 for Academy, and this isn't. These aren't great items for it. We have a Zeri, so that's already 2 gold. We should get 4 more gold on stage 1 at the very least. So I'm gonna pause here. You guys can take your time and try to figure out what items or what units you want to hold here. I'm gonna be talking for a bit, and I'm gonna press play. So sword is something that you have to take into consideration when you are holding units. So sword, you have 8 components you can get dropped, and sword is one of them. This means that if I want to play towards AP, like using this Lux, I have a 1 in 7 chance of getting a tier. Otherwise, it's pretty unlikely that I don't think there's any other like AP oriented slams I can have. So I have to kind of see what component I get, but mainly I'm going to hold these 2 bruisers because it's like the only trait I've activated, and I'm going to play around this up as my front line for now. Obviously, they're 1-star, so I have no real I don't have a large incentive to play towards them. They're just my best choice right now. Here, I should hold Lux and Powder. I think I make a small mistake here and I play Draven instead. The reason Powder is obviously better is because at least she's scrap, while Draven has pretty much no way to play around the items we have right now. I'm thinking that we play around holding this Aurelia and this Maddie, just because Maddie is, like we said, can use Shojin and is one of the best 1 cost in the game. I think this Darius pair is pretty fake because we have better frontline options, and I'm not going to play around Conqueror. So get our last bit of gold here. I don't think this really changes anything. I think I'm just going to sell. I should sell Zeri here for Aurelia and 1 Darius. But like, I'm not going to hold Zeri ever with these items, right? I think you need a Rage Blade or an IE to play her, preferably Rage Blade early on. It's more tempo. We can go a little bit into augment picks and maybe a bit into Sage 2. So here I'm thinking the worst one here is probably One for All. I'm not really trying to commit to a reroll comp here. A 1 cost reroll. I think this augment in general is pretty bad. I don't think there's a lot of good 1 cost rerolls as well, so I'm probably gonna stay away from this one. 1 basically means that we have to commit to like Sorks in this specific spot. And then Scavengers is actually not that bad, and I should probably consider it more. But I think at the time I'm playing this game, I just have a really bad idea of Scavenger. But I should definitely consider it more. I roll those 2 and think it's between long distance and high voltage. I don't really want to go artillerists. I'm not really sure of the lines, but I know for a fact that I don't have a slammable item on Trist. So if I want to play towards like a Trist reroll or artillerist, then I want to have at least 1 slammable item here. So I think gold is for dummies is not bad as an econ augment early on, but I don't like taking this when I don't have a frontline upgrade or a frontline item I can make. That's like 1 to 1.5 gold that I miss out every round. So we just hold our Lux pairs and we stay on level 3 because I think I see no reason to level here. We have no upgrades. We're sitting on Lux pair, so we're trying to wait on that Lux 2. And the lower levels can give us a better chance of hitting these like 2-star steps, 2-star Maddies, any like powerful 1 coster that can help us push levels. And we're gonna head towards like an AP comp. But yeah, that's pretty much it for stage 1 to stage 2. And I genuinely believe that if you master understanding how to play around these lines, and I think you can set yourself up really well and make your games a lot easier. So just master this part, and I believe you will climb a lot more efficiently. As always, if this helped you or you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing and check out our Discord for free coaching.